Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.
Dearest fantasy readers, welcome to the Dear Fantasy Reader podcast, where two best friends, Hannah and Karen, travel through the pages of our favorite romantasy novels. Join us as we take flight into the world of the Empyrean series, diving deep into the chapters, exploring characters, scenes, theories, foreshadowing, and more, taking what we've learned from the second book, Iron Flame, to reread and re-experience the first.
With that content warning and spoiler alert, we will be covering anything and everything Empyrean series to this date and any content Rebecca Yarros has given us. Also, due to the nature of these books, this podcast is rated R in content and in language.
As Rebecca Yarros says, readers who may be sensitive to these elements, please take note and prepare to enter Basgiath War College. That's always so fun to say.
I know.
Oh my goodness. Okay, today we are covering chapters 26 and 27 a little differently than initially planned, because now we have insights from the new Xaden POV chapter 27 that released in the new paperback edition of Fourth Wing, which we will link down in the show notes if you don't already have it. We got so lucky because it just so happened to release the same week that we were outlining this episode for Violet's point of view of chapter 27, which meant we had time to add in the new context and insights.
Oh, so lucky. And if you haven't listened already, we did release an episode focused specifically on Xaden's chapter 27, detail by detail, which we will also link for you in the show notes in case you need it.
And I have to mention that after we reread Violet's chapter 27 and started the outline, I wrote in my notes specifically, quote, "I feel so many emotions about this whole chapter. This is the one I hope we get from Xaden's POV if it's not chapter 22 of their first kiss."
Oh, you totally called it.
I so did. And I'm so glad, because I really did finish this chapter and just be like, it has all of the elements that I would hope to get to see, and we did.
And so perfect with us doing this one in the exact same week. Like, what?
And it's been a little bit of time since we were initially supposed to record this episode, but things just worked out that we've had enough time now to go back. And I think it's so much richer for it now that we have, we mentioned so many questions that we had that were answered. And I really think that's like one of the most fascinating parts about getting a Xaden POV, right?
100%.
Now, time for our summary report of chapters 26 and 27 from our personal scribe informant, Karen.
As a reward for winning the squad battle, Violet's squad flies 6 hours to a forward outpost in Montserrat for a week-long tour. When they arrive, Rhiannon tells Violet that her home village is less than an hour away on foot, and Violet tells her they will figure out how to visit their family. The squad is introduced to the active service riders, and one of them is Mira, which makes for a super endearing reunion. 2 days later, Rhiannon and Violet sneak out to Rhiannon's home village. Mira catches them, but they are able to convince her to go with them. While they're there, Mira tells Violet that if she wants her signet to manifest, she should stop blocking it by thinking it has anything to do with their mother. Her power is hers, and hers alone. As they are leaving Rhiannon's sister's home, Xaden appears from the shadows. He just couldn't stay away.
Not even 2 days.
Not even 2 days. He missed her too much. The next afternoon, half of Violet's squad, Xaden and Mira, are gathered for Mira's spin on Battle Brief. She does her best to get them thinking of all the ways something can go wrong and how to best utilize their signets. Dane, bleh. Sorry, I had a physical reaction.
So different from my Xaden physical reactions.
Dane is being a know-it-all. Xaden is bickering back. Mira is fed up. Xaden smoothly communicates with Violet in her mind through the bond they share from their mated dragons for the very first time. Before shocking the room with his blackout shadow abilities. Mira pulls Dane, Violet, and Xaden out into the hall and lectures each of them. She chastises Violet and Dane, telling them to get their shit together. She warns Violet about becoming Xaden's shadow, always second priority. Violet defends Xaden as he has been trying to help her keep her seat, but this revelation shocks Mira. They are interrupted when the wards go down and griffins are poised for the attack. Mira orders Xaden to get Violet to safety. Violet protests, but Xaden forces her out to mount their dragons. Dane tells her that the other first years could die if they stay. She needs to leave. Violet continues to beg, but Xaden kisses her, buying time before Taryn arrives, scooping Violet into his claw, and they leave Montserrat.
So much happens. It's also juicy too. Drum roll, dragon riders, as we are officially leaving Besgaiath for a super duper safe outpost. Yeah. Diving right into discussion and analysis.
A super safe outpost. As a reward for winning the squad battle, second squad gets to go to the front, which really doesn't sound like a reward to me, but you know, to each their own.
Me neither. And I think it's actually them getting to leave Besgaiath that is like most of the rewards, since they're always there and they never really do get to leave. But right, like the actual trip is more dangerous work. But then some of them are like, oh, do we get to see action? And it's okay. You just got to remember, these are like military kids.
That's true. They all are very excited about all of the deadly stuff they have faced this far. So it makes sense, but that's why I said to each their own.
Can't relate. But I guess if you get to like ride your dragon a bit, you know, that's fun. When they arrive at Montserrat, Rhee realizes that they're super close to her village. And I love this moment because she barely gets a word out to Violet about it before Violet is like, absolutely, yes, some point this week, we are going to figure it out.
Oh, I love it, because that's the kind of friend that we all want and the kind of friend we should all strive to be. Rhiannon didn't even have to ask. Violet also has a sister, so she understands how much Rhee must be missing her family, and she would also do anything to help one of her friends.
Oh, yeah. I mean, second to Violet and Xaden, Rhiannon and Violet's relationship progression is my favorite. Like, I really enjoy getting to see their friendship evolve.
Me too. It's so good.
And then, in a super sweet twist, we find out that Mira is stationed at this very outpost. Violet forgets to be stoic and emotionally untouchable, breaking for a run, but Mira does too. Opening her arms for Violet, I found this outward display of affection from them in front of everyone so refreshing and so sentimental.
Oh, I loved this moment so freaking much. I think being raised by their mother, where we can pretty accurately assume that they didn't really have tons of affection from her
Right.
growing up. And these women just literally drop everything and just, they don't care who's watching them. And they don't care if it makes them look weak in this moment. And they're just happy to have this time together.
And that's so endearing. Rereading this part actually made me tear up a little bit. Like the way Violet describes all that has happened to her, to herself, like she thinks this through since she last saw her sister before she crossed the parapet. And specifically when she thinks, quote, "She blurs in my vision because I might be alive, thriving even, but I'm not the same person she left at the base of the turret. And from the heaviness in her eyes, she knows it too." I just got full body chills. And then she follows that up with, "We might be hundreds of miles from Basgiath, but I've never felt more at home."
That's the one that got me.
And she's right, though. Like, Violet is not the same. She has become hardened to some capacity. But at the same time, she's also grown so much into herself. So it's like a bittersweet moment.
Yeah. And she hasn't hardened as much as she could have.
Oh, yeah. We also get an idea here of how the outposts themselves work. Since this is an eastern outpost, which means it borders Poromil, they employ a full 12 riders, 3 on patrol, 3 on standby, and 6 resting, all at any given time in a rotation. Like, I found it really interesting that Commander Quad, I think is how you pronounce his name, says he thought that this was the safest outpost on the border to send them, yet they end up getting attacked. Which, okay, maybe it was the safest outpost. But why would they have Mira at the safest outpost when her signet would be more strategically utilized to strengthen wards where they're weakest?
It just seems like a waste for such a badass rider. Violet tells Mira, "I think there's way more going on along the borders than what we're told." And Mira is like, "Well, duh." My thought was maybe it is one of the safer places. Even though they were being attacked, maybe it just gets attacked less than all of the other places. So maybe everywhere else is more dangerous than we're told.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. And it says even more about how unexpected and significant it is that they do get attacked at one of the safest. It just doesn't explain to me still why Mira would be stationed there, but maybe it was just a case of convenience for Rebecca Yarros, so Violet could conveniently see Mira. It's probably all it is. I think I really begin to appreciate Mira as a character in this chapter when she finds Vi and Rhee sneaking out, because she might be a badass, ruthless rider like her mom, but she breaks the rules here for Violet and has compassion, not without some arguing, but still.
It really is the compassion that sets her apart from General Sorrengail. And Violet knew exactly what she was doing when she convinced her by throwing the sister thing at her. Like, how could she possibly say no to Violet when she's like, "Can you imagine not being with me if I had a kid?"
She totally pulled that right out of her back pocket. She knew it was going to work.
But that just shows you that compassion is a part of Mira's character.
Well, it is. And I hope that we get to see a little bit more of that in future books, because after this chapter, I began to not really care for Mira a ton in the interactions that we get to see of her. But we still got 3 more books if she makes it that far.
Stop it.
Honestly, I love this whole scene for Violet, though, because while they're visiting Rhee's family, Violet gets to tell Mira about things like her poisoning techniques, and respect shines in Mira's eyes. Violet hasn't gotten to tell anyone but Xaden this, and she doesn't inherently know that he admires her for that. So someone that loves her unconditionally is finally getting to tell her that they're proud of her, which she hasn't gotten from anyone. And she needed Mira to tell her to stop blocking her power, thinking it has anything to do with her mom. That was really important.
Yeah, she really hasn't had anyone she could tell until now. Although I do believe that Rhee would have kept the secret. But again, we've seen this with Violet, and she probably was keeping it from Rhee so that she wouldn't be considered an accomplice if she was caught. And she's just trying to protect her from knowing some information that she shouldn't know to keep her from getting in trouble. And it is different whenever she gets to tell her sister, who she has known for her whole life.
Absolutely. And I think that I'm actually glad that that was saved from Rhee so we could see that progression stretch through both books. Though it was a little frustrating that Violet does get on to Xaden for the things she turns around and does to Rhee, but we will get there when we get there.
Oh, yeah. We will not stop talking about that in Iron Flame. But back to this one, I also just really loved how Mira doesn't scold her for breaking the rules, and she's just happy that Violet is alive by any means necessary.
Yeah, she's really receptive and understanding with Violet, which is not super common for her family members. But Mira's also very direct, and she asks her what is going on with her and Dane. And Violet puts it perfectly, saying, I needed to change to survive. He wouldn't let me.
I mean, that's a very direct answer that she gives her back, too. But there is something about an older sister. I don't know how. They can just always see straight through whatever front or lies or perception you are trying to have up to keep things looking normal and everything.
Yeah.
They just always know.
Well, then Mira brings up Xaden, and Violet's stomach churns at her description of him as the traitor's son. Violet quickly shifts the subject to her dragon scale armor and questions if Mira has asked about having them made for all riders. And Mira said that leadership is looking into it, but I'm really confused because this was never brought up again. And I guess maybe it was just to show that leadership really just doesn't care.
You're definitely right. I think it really shows that maybe they just don't care. And like, you would think they would have at least considered having them made for riders, at least the ones on the front lines, because you'd think they want to keep as many riders and dragons alive as possible.
Exactly, especially considering that less and less dragons are bonding to riders, and losing a single active rider has major repercussions, like 1,000 infantrymen.
Yeah.
Do you not want to keep your force intact? But Mira did say it took her a whole molting season to collect the dragon scales. So that's not necessarily super realistic to do for hundreds of riders. It's just there was no payoff from that comment. Maybe Rebecca just wanted to include it for us to be like, well, why wasn't this thought of? Then Mira shares that she kept Violet's book of fables for her so her mother wouldn't throw them out, which was so considerate of her to do, and one of the moments that Mira really pulled at my heartstrings.
Agree.
We will come back to this in the foreshadowing section.
Ooh. Okay, now I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this.
You guys know I love a good theory rabbit hole.
So true.
Staying on topic, though. So Violet and Mira go outside to give Rhee a private moment to say goodbye, and Violet asks if Mira has been stationed with a bonded pair of dragons before. Mira says, 1. Why? And then Violet explains that she just wanted to know how long they could be separated when Xaden steps out of the shadows and says, turns out about 3 days is their max. I love this moment. You know, when you're at a sports game and everyone jumps up when someone scores and they're just like, yeah. That happens in my head when I read this part every single time. And I feel so validated that it was as meaningful as I hoped. I interpreted it that way, but I do tend to romanticize Xaden. But it's very validating to know that I was right.
Oh my gosh. But it's also my favorite thing because I don't think really either of us are big time sports girlies, and that our sports cheering moment is literally Xaden showing up in a book.
Yeah, pretty much. Says a lot about us.
Like, oh, sports, whatever. Xaden!
Unless it's a Chiefs game now. Go Taylor's boyfriend.
But I am so glad that he is back because chapters without Xaden make me miss him so much.
Yeah, same. Which is why Iron Flame drove me quite a bit nuts. But then I wonder, how long was Xaden waiting there outside of Rhee's house? Just like waiting in the shadows. That sounds a little creepy. But then, like, what else was he supposed to do since that was where Taryn is for Sigale? And that was his cover.
Why didn't Taryn say anything to her whenever they got there?
She said Taryn had been silent for the last couple hours. Suspiciously silent might be how she worded it. Yeah. But Taryn knows, like, how Xaden felt at this point. He knows he loves her. Because Sigale would have told him. Which is...
it's true.
We'll get to that. Okay. But I just figure he probably just sat in silence, like not wanting to intrude on her bonding time with Mira, which is super sweet. Truly, though, what makes this moment even better is knowing that it wasn't Sigale and Taryn that couldn't stay apart for about 3 days. It was Xaden, which was confirmed like 13 times in Xaden's POV, and I ate up every moment. I just really loved finding out that he was concerned about Violet being so close to the border. He was driving Sigale mad, constantly thinking of her, and that the dagger smuggle mission was a secondary reason.
That was one of my favorite reveals ever. Him needing to be with her, but also how it was Sigale's idea to be like, all right, smuggle run.
Even though Xaden is the one heading all these smuggle runs, you'd think it would have been his first. And when we first had this outline written before we got his POV, I had in there, like, I kind of hope, because his pack is lighter than it was when he arrived. And so I was like, oh, that seems like a smuggle run, right? But does that kind of take away from the fact that he showed up for Violet? Because then it sounds like that was actually the purpose. So I found it really relieving and satisfying that Rebecca made sure to emphasize that it was Sigale's idea and that truly for Xaden, he was just down bad.
I just love it so much.
Then we jump to the next day where half of Second Squad is gathered around a table in the briefing room with Mira, Xaden, and a few Montserrat riders. And it starts off strong with Mira using her lesser magic to fling Riddick backwards across the room after he put his boots on the table.
Oh my gosh. The comedic relief that I needed was Riddick being flung across the room. And this is where Xaden's point of view begins. And he is equally appalled that Riddick put his shoes on the table.
You know, okay, so I was actually kind of taken aback when I noticed that, like when I was reading his point of view for the first time, that as much disdain as Xaden has for Navarre, this shows he still values military customs. And I really had to think about that because it now makes a ton of sense. His dad was infantry. He would have instilled those values, even though the military itself is doing these wrong things under this terrible leadership. He still has that value for respect and disrespectful things.
Yeah. And honestly, Xaden just probably gets annoyed by Riddick's ridiculousness too.
That's kind of fair, especially with like how much is on Xaden's shoulders. Looking at someone like Riddick might be a little difficult. Well, I hope that doesn't stop Riddick because I just love him and his humor.
He's our comic relief.
No one can seem to stop looking at Xaden. Dane is glaring, Mira is side-eyeing, and Violet is blatantly staring, which is also interesting because Xaden never seems to notice in his point of view that Violet has been staring at him this whole time. He's too busy glaring back at Dane. But I want to talk about how Violet describes a palpable energy in every room Xaden enters, brushing over her skin like a caress every time their eyes meet. I am convinced this is one, if not both, of their signets subconsciously reaching for the other, especially as their bond strengthens literally in this scene, which is the perfect blend of romantasy. I love to see it.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I love that point, especially with how often he caresses her face or embraces her with his shadows as well. So that makes so much sense for it also to be their bond.
And I think that it's interesting because those are seemingly all intentional. Every time we've had a POV where he's done something like that, Rebecca's written in that Xaden used his shadows in some way to do that. This is neither of them are actively seemingly doing it, because I looked for it specifically when I first cracked open Xaden's point of view. In this moment, he's busy daydreaming about Violet and thinking about how he intentionally put himself between her and Liam, meaning this wasn't something he noticed or was intentionally doing. So I actually think that this could be Violet's energy signet, being able to tangibly feel energy in the air between people, or specifically sensing the energy of their bond strengthening.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like that with her pure energy signet. So,
you know, like when you talk about how you can feel an energy in the room, I don't know the technical word for it, but there is one, like people give off energy.
yeah.
I wonder if this was Rebecca's. I really am hesitant to think that could be like a jump of a theory, but at the same time, what a description that's so close to now knowing she has pure energy as her signet.
Right.
Of like what she can do with it. And I wonder if she will start to be able to sense like energy in the air.
Yeah, it could go really big, like her lightning. It could be really small. Like, that's interesting to think about.
Right.
We're going to have to like pay attention.
But on the topic of powers, this scene is so fun to read. Mira is trying to teach them a real life battle brief, and they're struggling. We have this moment we've discussed before where we find that the third years have been called out to the Midland forts, quote, more times than they can count, so that those riders can go to the front for an emergency. And Dane and his audacity argues with this, which is crazy. How is he going to tell them that's not correct about where they've been?
Because Dane thinks he knows everything. Like you just said, how is he going to say that something isn't correct so confidently to the people who are actually going to the Midland forts, and to Mira, who obviously just insinuated that third years go to active duty? Is that what it's called?
Active service, I think, is how they kind of say it. And that's like typical Dane, right? He's such a frustrating character to read. And for a character that Rebecca really wants us to love later, like I don't think she did him any favors in like how annoying he is in this. And I feel like I've put a lot of effort into balancing it out and trying to be fair with him, but geez. But Xaden calls it in his POV, thinking if he knew half of what's actually happening beyond the borders, he'd probably pass out. And he's not wrong, because it really does rock Dane when he finally does find out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of his life was a lie.
And to give him some credit, that is where he starts to be less annoying.
Yeah.
It's just in the meantime, we gotta bear through it. My favorite part, though, is where they start talking about their signets tactically. I like this because it's not just training the characters, but it's training us as the readers on how to understand the battles and how these signets can be utilized. I find it so fascinating.
Same. I love when they start listing the signets and like talking about how each person would be an advantage in battle.
Mm-hmm.
I love the little like spotlight on each person and how they need them to help.
I wonder how much fun Rebecca has planning this out. Like, how can I use their signets? Or what do I need to happen in a battle? What character needs to have what signet? Okay, I'm going to go back to that chapter and give them that signet. That's so fascinating to me. And I will say, I thought it was really cool how, in Xaden's point of view, he was already 5 steps ahead and came up with like 4 separate plans as soon as Mira asked, which is partly expected as a wing leader in 3rd year, but also shows that Xaden has long been trained to think like this, as again, his dad was infantry and the leader of a rebellion, so I'm sure he taught him battle strategy.
For sure. It really shows how he was able to make it to be a wing leader, even with the bias against him.
Mm-hmm.
I also loved how in his POV, he didn't actually think about the strategy that Violet came up with because he hadn't considered Mira in his strategy. So even now, he's taking that and he's continuing to learn. And I think this points to why he actually is such a good leader.
That's a really great observation. I think I just assumed that it was the same one, but you're right, Mira. Before they get deep into this conversation, though, Violet catches Mira glancing at Liam's rebellion relic and raises her eyebrows in challenge. This moment really shows just how far Violet has come since she first laid eyes on a marked one at Parapet when she was biased against them, to now where she is standing up for them against her own sister.
Yeah, it's been really awesome to watch her deconstruct this belief of what she was taught for the past several years. And she's seeing for herself what the marked ones have had to go through and will have to deal with for probably the rest of their careers, because not everyone is going to be able to see them as people just doing their best. They're going to see them as sons and daughters of traitors and guilty by association, which I'm sure we'll see come into play more and more as we continue through the rest of the series.
For sure. Because Violet acknowledges that Xaden is the oldest marked one, so none of the active writers have worked with them up until this point. It seems, even though I know some 3rd years have been out to the Midland forts, those writers then go to the front lines. So this might be the first time in a room they're interacting. Agreed. This will for sure come up. It's just a part of the reality of a marked one.
Oh, sad.
Hoping that changes with the revolution, though. Then Mira asks them who would be in charge. And of course, fucking Dane says he would. Again, has shown zero ability to lead. And Liam calls him out because Xaden is here, our wing leader. And this is one of my favorite moments from Xaden's point of view specifically, where he feels Violet's emotion of pride skitter down their bond, which is so sweet to think about. And we gush about this more in that episode. But I think it was really wholesome for this to be how their bond officially solidified.
Oh, I totally agree. And it makes it all the more sweet to me because it was her pride in Liam, one of his close friends who's like a brother, that did that.
Also, such a display of the progress that Violet has made.
Yeah.
Because for Violet, she has reason also to hate and want revenge on Xaden because of what she thinks happened to Brennan at the hand of Xaden's father. You know, pride as opposed to another intense emotion where they could have found out in the midst of a kiss. It just is so much more special, I think, actually.
Yeah.
Then Xaden tells Dane to pretend he's not here for the sake of the exercise before draping his arm over the back of Violet's chair and says, give Atos here the position we all know he craves. And Xaden thinks, I leave my arm planted like a battle marker, the command he can have. I'm mildly curious to see what he does with it. but that's the only position I'm ceding to. Go Xaden. Because he's saying there, you can have command, you cannot have her. Love it. Oh. Violet whispers, don't be a dick. And Xaden says, you haven't even seen me start to be a dick. In her mind, through their bond.
The first words he says to her in her mind.
Actually, I kind of would have preferred it not have been that, but it's fine.
Yeah.
It's still, it's a playful banter moment. I get it. I thought I loved this book before this point on my first read.
Mm-hmm.
I was done for the moment we learned that they could communicate telepathically. In fact, I don't want to read another book where they can't do this. It's so good.
It's just so fun, and it feels like you're in on like a secret that nobody else is privy to.
Well, see, I'd never read one like that before. And now I feel spoiled because I don't want to read another one without it. You get so much more dialogue and open and private dialogue because they don't have to worry about anyone else ever hearing them. They just speak freely, which is really intimate. It's so intimate,
Yeah.
Especially when you get to the spicy scenes and you're like, okay, what?
Oh, it's so good.
It is.
I love it.
So they have this moment where he's talking in her mind and then he winks at her. And my first outline before Xaden's POV, I wrote, how was that not obvious to everyone in the room? But now we know it was, and Dane did see it.
Yeah, it was so obvious. Oh, yeah, it is satisfying because I feel like Dane needed to see it, but it was so obvious, and I'm glad that that was pointed out in his chapter because when you're reading this, you're like, it's just kind of an awkward moment for everybody else in the room.
But Violet's so busy focused on Xaden, she doesn't comment on anyone else, so you're just left like, how did they not give it away in that moment that they could communicate telepathically also,
Right.
But
she was too enthralled by Xaden, but like that's exactly what I was about to say.
Now, I always assumed that Dane, when he came back with "You're the wing leader," was submitting to his rank. Now, with Xaden's perspective, I so see it as Dane calling Xaden out over inappropriate behavior with a subordinate. But who even cares about that? Because then Xaden thinks, not that I give a fuck either way. If it were safe for Violet, I'd be ecstatically guilty of inappropriate behavior. Wickedly inappropriate. Pause. Amongst other spicy thoughts that had my jaw on the floor that we already covered in the Xaden-focused chapter 27.
Yep.
That I barely made it through, so...
We geeked about that so much whenever we were like,
can you blame a girl?
So true.
So then Dane questions Xaden. Why is he there? And how is it that their dragons can only go 3 days apart? Whatever. Meanwhile, Sigale confirms for us that it was Xaden. He was the reason, not their dragons, calling his intolerance of being separated from Violet insufferable, mocking him. Where's Violet now? What's she doing? Is she thinking of me? Is she missing me? Is she getting closer to Atos? Does she dream about that kiss? How many days until Violet's? And he cuts her off. Love it. This banter in itself is so lighthearted and cute and also speaks volumes about his feelings if they weren't clear before he outwardly says them in just the next line. Violet steps in and defends Xaden, saying it was because of their dragons. And Xaden thinks, and there she goes again, defending me. Fuck. I love this woman.
Oh my gosh.
Just take me out. Straight up, no hesitation, just admitted it. It was so much faster on his end than I expected. I thought that he would still be in a little bit in denial, and then it was all like retrospect when he realized he loved her during their first kiss. But I love to see it.
Yeah, and you mentioned that before we had this chapter earlier that you did think it was in retrospect. This is why it's so fun.
It is, because it was, again, so validating. But it's also like I do try and have a healthy balance of, am I romanticizing this too much? But then again, it's a romance book. Can you romanticize it too much? No. So screw healthy balance. And then Xaden says to Violet through their bond, "You never considered that it was you I couldn't stay away from?" This is the line for me. Arguably my favorite line in the whole book. It does more for me than the whole first kiss scene. Just to put it into perspective for you all.
Wow.
It only took them being apart 2 days and a day because of flying. And he was done denying it. He has fallen in love.
Ugh. It's so good, but like holy whiplash, because the last time they spoke, he was like, it would be a mistake to get involved. And now it's like, Violet, I can't stay away from you. I love you. But like, I also love lines like this from Xaden. So like, I need more. Keep them coming.
Well, we went pretty in depth in his point of view chapter. When we talked about his reasoning, I thought he was just in denial, but he gives us context that he actually is worried about how Violet will be perceived.
Yeah.
Being with him, being associated with not even just a marked one, but like the marked one, right? And how everyone would look at her differently. So now we know that, like, yes, from Violet's perspective, holy whiplash. But from his, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
And then I just fall a little harder, you know?
It gave us like a nice nuance to this chapter with his, I love it.
Yeah. That whole stretch where we said we were so annoyed that he hadn't spoken to her because it seems immature. And now I'm like, I spoke a little too soon. Just needed Xaden's point of view.
And that's a good lesson for life.
Fair. And I love that he acknowledges here that Violet elbowing him was her calling him out. But he says in a way that Sigale does that he loves it, that she isn't scared of him. He even thinks right after this, I'm fucked on every level known to man when it comes to Violet Sorengale. And yeah, boy, he is. And I love to see it.
Love to see it. And I love the comparison to Sigale because we know how much he loves Sigale too.
Which just reminded me of the line about him feeling like he disappoints every woman in his life. Oh, okay. We'll not go down that depressing rabbit hole. But Violet stays in denial. The boys continue to bicker, and I am tempted to literally go line by line of this chapter because the dialogue is absolutely fantastic. But for the sake of time, Violet steps up and gets them back on track. Dane outlines a plan that uses everyone's signet but Xaden's. But when asking if anyone else has any ideas, Violet says, sure, you stop ignoring that you have an incredibly powerful shadow wielder at your disposal and ask him to black out the area so no one sees you land. Snaps, snaps, snaps. And Xaden thinks, fucking love her. With love in italics, guys. Italics. Also, thank you, Violet. But it's not just that Dane was intentionally overlooking Xaden here. He truly doesn't realize how powerful Xaden is.
Right. He begrudgingly looks at Xaden and questions whether he can do that or not. And I love how Xaden didn't even bother to argue back with Dane, and he just decided to prove his point with his shadows, pouring them in the room until it was pitch black.
As a power girly, this scene is scrumptious. He even says he could surround the entire outpost with his shadows, but that would freak people out. And then, in stark contrast to how dangerous we see in this moment that he is, he uses a shadow to caress Violet's cheek, which we learn he did by crooking a finger. You guys know I was hoping to see more of how his shadows work on paper. Even it's just like a small detail, and so good. And then when the shadows disappear, he says, "I hope you didn't get any ideas while we were in the dark there."
Now, this was my favorite quote because I just love the little teasing banter from him. And Violet doesn't bother to face him through that and just raises one finger, which we got in confirmation in Xaden's POV that this was, in fact, her middle finger.
I was so convinced that she raised one pointer finger, indicating that she had one idea of what they could do in the dark. I will say I still like mine better, so I'm going to wipe that memory of his POV from my own mind out of preference.
Hannah and I did have discussion about this before we got Xaden's POV chapter. And whenever we were reading it, I was on the phone with her and I said, "Hannah, there's confirmation of something we were discussing in chapter 27.
La 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 la, don't tell me.
And it was the middle finger thing. But I only thought middle finger because it is so Violet to just flip him off.
It totally is. But I also was thinking it's so Violet for her to be like making this sexual joke. I've got one idea. But then, the context following of her having an attitude makes more sense for the middle finger. I like the sexy banter a little better.
Yeah. We'll get more of that.
Oh, we get plenty. I can't wait because I know we're going to get more in Onyx Storm. So it's just So they wrap up battle strategy and Mira pulls Dane, Violet, and Xaden into the hall where she puts Dane in his place. Quote, "If I'd known that you were going to be such a hard ass with zero flexibility for the things she can't control, I never would have told her to find you after crossing the parapet. You two have been best friends since you were 5 years old. Figure your shit out." Direct and correct.
Mira was really cut the bullshit and get your act together. And it seems like Dane respects Mira, so I'm glad that she was the one to say this to him.
Yes, agreed. But it's crazy that it took Mira saying the same thing that Violet has been saying for him to listen. Because clearly, he respects Mira, but that just shows he doesn't respect Violet.
And how is somebody going to be your best friend and you not respect them?
He has a different definition of respect. He thinks he does. But it's not shown. It's not shown. Mira doesn't hold back on Xaden or Violet either, pointing out that Violet will lose valuable instruction time if she has to fly to him every 3 days. And though we know this isn't exactly how things end up panning out, her point still stands that Violet cannot and should not become a shadow to him. I liked that she made that point.
But Xaden makes a good point also. He says, "I'm right here. He came to where Violet was, and he doesn't intend for her to miss out on a bunch of stuff after he graduates, even though it's going to be a complicated situation either way."
Right. And we get to know from his point of view just how much he considers Violet and doesn't want her to be negatively affected by him in any capacity. So it does really hurt him when Violet seems to take Mira's words, which is fair, to heart about how much she doesn't know him.
Right.
Which was also good on Mira to point out. I'm just giving props here.
Yeah. It's older sister protectiveness.
Right. It's okay for me when someone who has her best interest at heart, still respects her as a writer and tells her that they're proud is a little overprotective. It's not overprotective in the way that Dana is. Now, Mira gets pretty worked up after finding out Violet can't keep her seat. And if we recall back in Chapter 8, Professor Kaori said to Violet, Mira is shrewd and gifted in the seat when it comes to writing, meaning more so than your typical writers. So this is something that comes naturally to Mira, that she excels at in comparison to your typical writer. But most importantly, she knows that Violet won't survive if she can't somehow keep her seat.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that Mira was so surprised that Violet was struggling to keep her seat, because I understand that it was easy for Mira, so her perception of how it would be for others is a little bit skewed. But with how tiny Violet is and all the other issues that she has, I just don't really feel like it should be that shocking.
That is fair, but I think that she assumed that Violet could keep her seat because otherwise she would have already died falling off. Like, it is not a normal thing for a dragon to be considerate enough about their rider to use their power to keep them on. So the shock of learning that, trying to think of, you can't keep your seat, how the hell did you fly 6 hours here?
Yeah.
Knowing that that's also not realistic in battle to have your dragon focused on using their powers to hold you in means that Violet will die if they don't figure something else out.
True.
I think it was just a lot to process in an emotionally charged moment. Yeah.
I do tend to forget how different Taryn is from all the other dragons that we have seen, and how much more he is really taking care of Violet.
Mm-hmm. When we also see how other dragons are like, what the fuck are you doing when he has the saddle? Like, it's not a normal thing. Or even when he bent his leg down for her to dismount. Like, but he's also one of the most powerful, so they're just not going to talk shit to him, you know?
True. This conversation is cut off when the wards fall. They are alerted to an incoming griffin attack. Things just get super chaotic. Mira orders Xaden to get Violet to safety. Violet is frantically fighting to stay, but she is more of a liability. When they go grab their packs, Liam demands to know if the wards falling were because of their smuggle mission, and Xaden assures him that it was not their fault. They all get up to the roof and everyone mounts their dragons, but Violet and Xaden are still waiting for Taryn and Sigale, as they were helping fight the griffins off as best as they could. Rebecca Yarros just paints this scene so well.
Yeah, it really was chaotic. We go from having this conversation with Mira to all of a sudden we're on the roof and we need to leave. But it really got me when Violet is pleading with Xaden for them to stay so she could help protect Mira. Violet describes so much compassion, so much understanding in Xaden's eyes. And this was special to me because it shows he sees what we do. Someone who's willing to risk it all for the ones that she loves, and instead of his usual hardened shell, he gets it. But he's not willing to risk her safety for it, even if she will hate him. And in this same moment in his POV, he reads her intentions. I am convinced. You can't. He does. Thinking to himself, Violet isn't going to leave on her own accord. I can see it in her eyes, feel it in the tense lines of her back. So, body language. I drop my shields. We talk about how important that is. And her emotions hurtle down the bond. We learned from the Pride situation that he doesn't have to have his shields dropped for her to send emotion, right? That's the first clue that shows us that this is intentions. Determination, fear. He interrupts his thoughts. She's going to bolt. That is a decision. That's an intention. Now, importantly, in Violet's point of view, I looked for this. She never has an inclination of an intention on page to bolt. It only reads that the compassion in his eyes makes her think he is going to let her stay. She hasn't made it to the point of thinking that she even needs to bolt because she thinks he's going to let her stay. And then he kisses her. There's no room in there.
Ooh.
So this seems to line up with Xaden's description of his intensic signet, that it is the subconscious moment before you even think about the intention, which tells us that there are likely plenty of times that he has read her intentions that we can't even pick up on in Violet's point of view because she may have never actually thought it on the page. But back to this scene specifically.
Oh my gosh.
I when I saw, was like, I almost dropped the book. Like, so excited to see it because it was a sneaky way for it to not be a spoiler, but to also tell people who are looking for it that it's there. I strongly recommend reading the kiss scene specifically from both of their perspectives side by side, but I want to point out what was most significant to me about it. In Violet's point of view, she thinks, the kiss is reckless and consuming, and I give it my all, knowing it might be the last one. In Xaden's POV, he thinks, I kiss her like this might be the last time she'll let me. Like this is an alternate reality and there's a chance she could love me back. I kiss her like she's mine. It's a stolen moment. It can never be anything more, but it's ours. I think we covered this before, but I couldn't not include it. It's just the last and last.
Mm-hmm.
And then knowing he loves her and that he didn't, he gave in at that moment, but it was in the name of protecting her. Like to get her to safety. Swoon.
So
it's so good.
Love it. I like how this kind of stuff renders us both a little speechless because we're just both like, ugh. But I also love they were both just like taking the opportunity during this near-death situation,
right,
to just really get one last kiss just in case, which really just does show us that they are endgame because anybody who's not endgame, you're not getting one last kiss with.
Oh, yeah. And I know that Violet thinks that this kiss was solely a distraction tactic, but so what? He was trying to get her to safety, and we know, and I guess she doesn't, so okay, we know it was still genuine. He even says to her, leave for me, Violet. First of all. But knowing that she's going to hate him for making her leave. When she tells him this, he says, I can live with that. But regret flashes in his eyes.
But yeah, it is a distraction, but it's not a selfish distraction. Like, it definitely hurt when she said that she would hate him for this. And I get that she wanted to be there for her sister, but they all made the right call to get her out of there because genuinely, what could Violet have realistically done to help?
Right. Not much. But I guess that's a little hard for her to understand in such an emotional moment. Yeah. I will say I perceived this to be like a distraction, but not an ill-intended one, I think.
Yeah.
I perceived this to be quite romantic. I just felt this whole scene so strongly when reading it. And then add on the conversation Xaden has with Sgaeyl and his point of view about how Violet is never going to forgive him, especially if something happens to Mira. And her saying Violet doesn't deserve him if she can't forgive him for the least of his transgressions, which is spot on. But also, now knowing what Violet has already and will have to forgive him for in Onyx Storm just makes me kind of want to cry.
Ugh. I'm trying not to get too far ahead of myself and thinking about how their dynamic has already changed and how it will continue to change in Onyx Storm, but it's hard and it's emotional to think about.
Well, it is. And it's like, yes, I want to think about how this plays into the larger scheme of like their romantic development. But then there's times where it's kind of depressing to think about.
Yeah. So true.
Because I know that we have 3 books and
Yeah.
things are not going to be sunshine, rainbows, and golden dragons the whole time. So
And golden dragons.
you like that?
I did like that a lot. All right, it's time to head on over to the Healer's Quadrant to get a temperature check on our favorite characters, our favorite moments, and quotes. My hot this week was Violet, and she takes this for me in this set of chapters because she helps Rhiannon go visit her family, and she lays down the law for Mira to not fuck with her friends.
Fully agree with Violet. Even Mira, this set of chapters made me appreciate her way more than I even remembered from my first read. And honestly, I have no qualms about mine always being Satan. But him fully acknowledging his love for Violet and opening up to her more about it, and the fact that he couldn't bear to stay away from her for more than 2 days before they took flight. I just love it. They all take it. They all get it this week.
Oh, and my not this week, there actually wasn't much of a not for me. Like, Dane obviously annoys me anytime he's on the page, but he wasn't nearly as bad as he has been in the previous chapters. So I'm gonna stick with Dane as my usual answer, but I want to note it's not as strong as usual.
I have to agree. But you know what? I think I make up for not having a not in the fact that I have so many favorite moments. So let's get into those. Xaden showing up, and then the context that it was him that couldn't stay away. Violet calling out Mira to defend her friends. Xaden, this sounds oddly similar to your hot, doesn't it? Xaden putting his arm around Violet, then talking through their bond for the first time and winking. Just those details. And then, of course, 1000% the contrast of the kiss in both points of view, especially the compassion Xaden had for Vi when she begged him to stay. A laundry list.
And fair, because there are so many good moments, specifically in chapter 27. But I think one of my favorite moments was in chapter 26 that Rhiannon was able to see her sister and meet her nephew for the very first time. But, because I had to add in a sweet little wholesome moment, but my absolute favorite was Violet and Xaden figuring out that they could communicate telepathically.
I agree. And I also love that you pointed out that both of them figured it out in this chapter. I love that detail as well. Instead of like Xaden knowing for a while that he could try and then only just decided to, I liked to see that it was all within the same chapter.
Yeah.
Which it makes sense that I have so many favorite moments because this is arguably my favorite chapter in the whole book.
And you've mentioned that too.
I think maybe if not number 1, number 2, but we still have the rest of the book to reread. And I think I'm leaving room for 1 to be. But yeah, no, I freaking love this chapter.
Right.
And I did manage to narrow down my favorite quotes to 2. So.
Okay.
For the 13th time that you guys have heard me say this line, you never considered it was you I couldn't stay away from. Top 3 in the whole book, if not number 1.
So good.
Honorable mention goes to Taryn telling Violet, you have the power to be a pain in the ass too. When she's complaining about Xaden, that one had to make its way into this outline somehow.
Oh, it was so funny. I kind of forgot with everything else that's happening. It's like such an eventful chapter. I kind of forgot that he said that. So I'm glad that you pointed it back out. I've already mentioned mine, but it was whenever Xaden speaks into Violet's mind and says, I hope you didn't get any ideas while we were in the dark there.
It's so good. It's so flirty. He has such good one-liners. Like, Rebecca knows how to write Xaden lines. It's incredible. Yeah. They just do something to you.
Love a little flirty one-liner. Now, let's stop by the Scribe Quadrant for our Epigraph Analysis. Chapter 26, There is no stronger bond than that between two mated dragons. It goes beyond the depth of human love or adoration to a primal, undeniable requirement for proximity. One cannot survive without the other. Colonel Kaori's Field Guide to Dragonkind. This epigraph is setting us up for how Taryn and Sigale cannot go very long without each other, which we see play out way more in Iron Flame, but will likely play an even bigger role throughout the next 3 books.
Oh, yeah. I'm really wondering in Onyx Storm I think it's going to come into play a lot, especially if the theory of Xaden trying to distance himself for Violet for the sake of her safety, da-da-da-da. But that would mean their dragons would have to, and that kind of sucks for them, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting new dynamic.
I hope that that's not what happens. I hope that the turmoil in Onyx Storm is not in the relationship broadly and is focused on like the political issues.
Yeah.
The magical issues. Everything else. I need them to just stay good for 3 more books.
Oh, good luck with that.
Chapter 27 Epigraph. For valor above and beyond the call of duty in the Battle of Strathmore, where her bravery resulted not only in the destruction of a battery behind enemy lines, but also saved the lives of an entire company of infantry. I recommend Mira Sorengale receive the Star of Navarre, but if the criterion is not met, which I assure you it has been, downgrading to the Order of the Talon would be a shame, but sufficient. Recommendation for award by Major Potsdam to General Sorengale. We've briefly talked about this epigraph before. It just shows us that Mira was recommended for a higher award, but General Sorengale, her mother, chose to award her the second highest. We discussed how maybe Lilith is trying to avoid claims of nepotism, but I came across a theory by @Fungi, F-U-N-G-E-E, on Reddit that says maybe it was to stop her from rising too quickly and being brought into the inner circle and learning about Venin. I think I believe this because it's in line with the idea that Mira herself brought up in Iron Flame for why Lilith didn't want Violet to become a high-ranking scribe. She probably didn't want them knowing too much and burning the whole place down. Maybe this was Mira saying it out of spite and understanding because now she's connected why her mom didn't allow her the highest award that she earned and was recommended for. It would make sense for Lilith, especially if this happened after their father died, who I believe was likely assassinated for what he found out. Even him teaching Violet about the Venin growing up shows that he didn't agree with keeping that knowledge in the dark. And Lilith would not have wanted any of her kids rising to the top and getting assassinated like their father was.
Wow.
What do you think?
I am kind of convinced by this too. Whoa, good theory from Fungi. Wow. I'm going to be thinking about this all night. But it also helps give General Sorengale some grace because we know she wasn't bad, even though she had like some not so great moments.
Yeah, well, and we have to try and figure out where she wasn't bad because she does have quite a lot of those not so great moments. Then we just all of a sudden find out that she had good intentions the whole time. So then that would mean that the question is, what could a good intention be behind not giving Mira the higher award that she earned?
What if General Sorengale is actually our morally gray character?
Well, I think that's right. I think, yeah. I mean, she's not our morally gray enemies to lovers, but yeah, she's definitely morally gray after we learn that like she just done all this wrong to protect her kids, right? That's an immoral decision to some, but it's moral-ish under the guise of her doing it for her kids. So yeah, she's morally gray. Time to join our riot as we take flight into our foreshadowing and theories section, including moments that stood out during this reread and may or may not spiral into theories. Starting with Mira telling Violet about the assault that she got her scar from, and she mentioned seeing a horde of dragons across the border during the Griffin attack, which we now know were wyvern and not griffins. Next, when telling Violet about keeping the Book of Fables, Mira says, quote, "I know they're just stories, but I never used to get why the villains would choose to corrupt their souls and become venom. And now," her brow furrows, "now you empathize with the villain?" Violet teases. "No, but we have the kind of power people would kill for, Violet. Dragons and griffins are the gatekeepers, and I'm sure to someone jealous enough, ambitious enough, risking a soul would be a fair price for the ability to wield. Just makes me glad our dragons are so discerning, and our wards keep the griffin riders at bay." This was such a huge moment of foreshadowing, specifically of Jack turning venom. Someone jealous enough, ambitious enough. We should have known right then, but we thought he was dead. Eventually. We have learned with Bade that there are dragons that are not discerning enough. So this could go for any writer, as there seem to be more writers that are venom that we just don't know about yet. It's not a happy thought.
No.
But then Mira says, "Who knows what kind of people those furry creatures choose?" Talking about griffins. And if my suspicions that Mira and Serena will become lovers is true, this line would be such cheeky foreshadowing. And I think it actually convinces me even more.
Oh my gosh. Have you gone into this theory about Mira and Serena possibly becoming lovers?
Not on the pod.
Okay.
It was just kind of, honestly, I didn't really think of it as like a theory, but I guess it still would be. I just kind of assumed the whole time after they were like propped up as like similar, and then almost like they're enemies to lovers because they both killed each other's friends.
Ooh.
I don't know. I never thought of it as like this groundbreaking theory because I just kind of assumed that it was so obvious, but I guess it is a theory. Which we will likely have answers to in Onyx Storm. And of course, as they're fleeing Montserrat, Violet notices Xaden's pack is smaller than it was when he first arrived. Also, Imogen was notably not included when Violet named off every other person in explaining how her squad had split up. We now know from Xaden's point of view that Imogen was off on a smuggle run. She had faked sick and memory wiped the healer to escape to meet Serena. Importantly, we know that the Griffins attacking the outpost were not Serena's group.
It's very subtle about how Imogen is not included. I 100% missed it until we got Xaden's POV chapter. I was working an event yesterday for a bookstore, and I was talking to somebody about these books, and they were like, "Oh, I really need to read them again," because they've only read Fourth Wing once and Iron Flame once. And I was like, yeah, you have to read them again because you don't realize how much you miss in your first read. And then now with the context of the Xaden POV, it blows my mind.
We both did a second reread before we did this reread. This is our third.
Yeah.
And I didn't have all these puzzle pieces.
Right.
It takes, honestly, thinking about each line, which is like, no one realistically has the time that doesn't like devote an entire podcast to it. I think, honestly, if we reread the first half of this book, that we would pick up on new things. Yeah. Isn't that so interesting, though? I think that's one of my favorite things about this series specifically is that it doesn't end the moment you close that second book for the first time.
Right.
It's new experiences, one after the other. And I will always be very appreciative to Rebecca for creating this.
100%.
Finally, and we discuss this more in Xaden's chapter 27 episode, but we want to know who helped take down the wards and whether it was Dade. I noticed something in rereading Violet's POV of chapter 26 that we have to talk about. When they first arrived to Montserrat, after the 6-hour flight, Violet and Nadine are complaining about how rough the long flight was on their bodies. Then Violet thinks, naturally, Dane is minimally affected. His posture only lightly stiff. The naturally here is doing a lot of work. It implies that Dane rarely shows signs of physical exertion, which only makes Xaden's 2 observations of Dane and his POV that much more suspicious. The first time he thinks, is it just me or is he already out of breath as we climb through the 3rd floor and out onto the roof? Such a strange and random line, I felt like. And then later, he heads down the rampart toward Kath, but he's nowhere near as fast as Liam. Liam's great, but he's a first year to a squad leader, 2nd year.
Yeah.
Nowhere near as fast. Saying, all right, he's not as fast as Liam. Nowhere near as fast. Okay. So this was already super incriminating that something is going on here and seemed so random, especially when Violet has never commented on Dane's physical demeanor in her POV, so we thought, but Karen found that that's not the case.
You guys,
Take it
found
away.
Something. Okay, so this is so easy to miss without Xaden's point of view, but on page 345, when Dane gives Violet the reality check that they need to leave for the sake of their whole squad, Violet thinks his words are choppy as they race upward toward the open door. Choppy words happen when you're out of breath.
I did not put that together.
I did not put this together until I decided to reread it today before we started recording, just for a little refresher. And so Rebecca did not say this outright, but she did, and doubled down on it twice in Xaden's POV.
Right.
Which, it has to mean something.
First of all, that was such a good catch. I'm thoroughly impressed, especially paired with how Rebecca made sure to comment on how Dane handles physical things naturally in the chapter before. She was emphasizing this. I don't understand how, but this has convinced me that Dane either played a role in taking the wards down, or he was busy doing something that will come into play in future books we just don't know about yet.
Do you think that Rebecca is saying we are too hard on him because it hasn't been revealed that he's doing anything bad yet?
Oh, so you're saying maybe she's like, oh, y'all haven't seen anything yet. Just wait.
Maybe trying to throw us off, or
I don't think so, because I would prefer that. I think actually that way I could continue despising him. I either want that or I want a really good, thorough redemption arc and not what is supposed to be that, I think, in Iron Flame. But the way that she talks about him, she says she's his number 1 defender and explains this by saying that she knew where his character was going as she was writing Fourth Wing. So she was trying to say there, I think, that she didn't really blame him or think much of the not great things he was doing now because she knew he would end up in a good place. But you never know with her.
So true. Since there were no Dane touchy moments, which we love, and we already discussed Xaden's one intention moment, that wraps up chapters 26 and 27. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to join us for our next episode where we will deep dive into chapters 28 and 29.
If you are enjoying our content, please leave us a review. You can also check out our Patreon, follow us over on socials where we have a giveaway for this new chapter going on right now, and share to all of your Fourth Wing friends.
As always, we encourage you to email us all of your thoughts, theories, and suggestions. Drop them below if you are watching on YouTube, or join us over on Discord.
Until next week, dearest fantasy readers, Prepare yourselves for more fangirling, theories, and war games as we continue our journey through the Empyrean series.
War game?